That it.
Okay, I was saying that President Museveni said that the Ugandan market is insufficient, and it is because the market has been saturated. A classic problem that has been identified by Marxists as a contradiction of capitalism in a profit-oriented economy. And I said that the only way we can deal with it is to switch our emphasis from profit motive to benefit for society. Have a rationally, centrally planned economy. The other path Museveni can take to resolve this is to resolve this either through fascism and or imperialism. Fascism involves imposing harsher living and working conditions on the workers. That is low living standards, poor quality social services, poor pay, low wages. The other option is for him to seek more desirably captive markets abroad, which is what he seems to be oriented towards. It can also be temporarily dealt with by allowing more migrants from abroad in order to dilute the labor market and reduce workers' bargaining power. That is a broad and interesting topic. Maybe we can discuss it again at a different time. What else did President Museveni talk about? He mentioned the principle of democracy, but he did not elaborate on what he means by this. He rightly criticizes those who, quote, view political positions as a form of living. But then again, the NRM government has turned politics into basically the most lucrative occupation. A member of parliament or minister earns more than a consultant physician, for example. To have a prosperous life, you must either be a well-connected capitalist or a politician. A career as an ordinary worker or public servant has no path to a good life, unless one engages in corrupt or ethically dubious practices. There's a huge incentive in Uganda to seek political positions for a decent life. It is said that His Excellency himself is an extremely wealthy man. Some claim he's one of the richest people in Africa, if not the whole world. If so, it is reasonable to assume that President Museveni and his family have become rich through exploiting their political positions. For His Excellency to criticize Ugandans for seeking political office to enrich themselves is a classic case of the pot calling the kettle black. If I am wrong, I hope they can subject themselves to a public independent audit and explain how they've become so prosperous so that the rest of us can learn from them and maybe improve our lives as well. His Excellency says that in 1971 he left, quote, a well-paying job to fight Idi Amin. This is a very telling statement because despite his very basic education and little experience, he was able to get paid well as a public servant. Yet he has failed to ensure that today's public servants get meaningful remuneration, as he had access to in his youth. How many Ugandans with his level of education, of his level of education, today have access to meaningful employment? Is it any surprise that many seek political positions as a path to wealth rather than to serve their communities? He has not made it possible for Ugandan citizens to get well-paid jobs as public servants, the jobs that he was given as a youth. President Museveni mentions that there are 50,000 factories and new jobs in the service sector. I looked up official unemployment figures and they do appear to be quite low. However, while official unemployment numbers seem low, the reality for many Ugandans, especially the youth, is that these jobs are precarious, low-quality work with poor pay and poor working conditions. His Excellency points to the various agricultural projects he views while flying all over the country as proof of the achievements of his government. He doesn't mention how this compares with agriculture developments Uganda had before he took office. Most, if not all, the agricultural projects and institutions pre-exist the interim seizure of power. I wonder whether entities like the Lint Marketing Board and Coffee Marketing Board still exist. The president appealed to Ugandans to quote-unquote love Uganda, patriotism and Pan-Africanism. It raises the question of how much this passion of Pan-Africanism is for reasons that coincide with workers' interests. I reckon that he and his elite allies want more markets, as I mentioned earlier, for their goods so that they can increase their profits. Nothing wrong with this, actually. One great Chinese leader put it this way: to be rich is glorious. We definitely need to trade more with our neighbors, but the common man's economic well-being should be protected and promoted as we go about it. His Excellency expressed disapproval to what he describes as the pseudo-politics of me. It seems what he was trying to say is that public service should not be about pursuing individualistic goals, but seeking the overall good of society. That said, what else is politics about other than citizens looking out for their interests? That is mainly security, decent housing, infrastructure, quality healthcare, quality education, and so forth. On the issue of law and order, President Museveni highlights alleged criminal actions by opposition activists backed by foreign interests. He accuses the opposition for, quote, transporting audiences. Some would ask, what's wrong in transporting audiences? Is it not a legitimate part of peaceful, non-violent political agitation, campaigning, and mobilization? If you want to reach masses, you must get logistics in order. He also accuses the opposition of causing chaos in the country on behalf of foreigners, which, if true, is indeed unacceptable and must be suppressed. It may also be the case that state intelligence operatives, agents provocateurs, do blend in with these crowds in order to instigate violence and destruction of property. Another issue President Museveni talks about is voting. His Excellency says Ugandans should have the right to vote. I can't argue with that. My problem is that it seems that that's where their rights stop. They don't have the right to ensure that the vote counting is conducted and reported accurately. Museveni urges Ugandans to go and vote, but offers no tangible reassurances that the vote counting will be transparent and the result respected if it is not favorable to the incumbents. In other words, it appears he only wants people to rubber stamp a potentially corrupt process and not expose any malpractice. Vote counting should also be transparent in order to dispel allegation of rigging. In this, President Museveni contradicts his earlier statements where he called on citizens to exercise vigilance against corruption in the civil servant, while he and his officials condemn vigilance against suspected vote rigging. His Excellency announced that the future of Uganda is bright, precisely because oil flow is to start in 2026. The question again is, who is benefiting? Is it Ugandan working families or a small elite clique? Again, in order to ensure that the oil revenues benefit the common man above all, are there guardrails in place to prevent corrupt practices? Is he going to allow the citizen vigilance he recommended earlier on for fighting corruption in the civil service? President Museveni said police should use more humane and non-lethal methods of crowd control, like tear gas, water cannons, and so on. He also alleged looting by Kyagulanyi and his supporters, and he claims he was a target of attacks by quote-unquote Kyagulanyi gangs. He, however, did not offer evidence to back up these allegations. Let's hope proof will soon be presented, either to prove these allegations or to debunk them. So that, in short, is my brief critique of President Museveni's speech. Thank you for listening.